Good morning. Welcome to Breakfast with Charlie State and Naga Munchetti.
Our headlines today. Changes to COVID travel rules in England. We'll find out later if PCR tests for the fully vaccinated will be scrapped.
Calls for clearer guidance on care home access. Some families say they still can't visit loved ones as often as they'd like, despite the easing of COVID restrictions.
Nearly a year after being diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumour, pop singer Tom Parker from The Wanted tells us why he's staying positive.
It's not that I'm ignoring cancer, but I just don't want to pay it any attention. The more attention you pay it, the more it consumes your life, and I don't want it to consume my life. I've got kids, I've got a family.
A big problem for the big screen. Box office takings are still well down. But can Bond save cinema, or will he prove to be part of its downfall? I'm at a cinema in North London to find out.
Good morning. It's a happy return to European football for the Hammers as West Ham start their Europa League campaign with victory in Croatia, the only British team to win last night.
And she made history with her US Open victory. New tennis superstar Emma Raducanu will join us at 8 o'clock to tell us how her life has changed.
Good morning. A lot of dry and reasonably warm weather today, particularly for central and eastern parts, but there is some rain that's moving its way in from the west. I'll have all the details for you right here on BBC Breakfast.
Good morning to you. It's Friday, the 17th of September. Now, changes to international travel are expected to be announced by the government later today.
Scrapping PCR tests for double jab people and simplifying the traffic light system could be amongst the new rules in England. Our transport correspondent, Carrie Davis, has this report.
Sunshine, but no one sunbathing. In a normal year, 80% of the guests at this hotel in Turkey would have been British. Turkey went on the red list in May, meaning anyone travelling from there to the UK has to quarantine in a hotel. Since then, it's been a difficult summer here, but they're holding out hope it could change.
We've just about survived, but it's been very, very challenging. At the moment, we're very, very quiet. So to get the British market for a sort of a go-ahead at this stage would be great. It could take us through till the end of October, maybe even into November. So at the moment, it's very, very important.
There are now 62 countries on the red list, including Pakistan and Mexico. The government will announce changes to the list today. There are other moves ahead too. The travel industry hopes that the traffic light system, where countries are currently divided into green, amber or red, will be simplified. And it wants the more expensive PCR tests that all travellers have to do when they arrive in the UK, replaced by the cheaper lateral flow tests. It worries that the cost is putting off travellers.
I think there's always that risk with lateral flow that you haven't got the gold standard of PCR. I think the key is at the moment it's looking at that risk-reward scenario. We're seeing infection rates are high, but obviously we've got the vaccination through in the UK. And I think that the government's got to balance that us getting back on with life.
The government has previously argued that PCR tests are needed to keep an eye on variants of concern, and some say they're still needed.
I would like to see PCR tests remain because they've given us so much information already from the sequencing. So we know when Delta was introduced into the UK, when the Delta variant came in, that this virus was imported over 500 times. And we wouldn't have that information if we weren't doing the screening and the sequencing that's associated with that.
The government has said that its top priority is to protect public health and that decisions on the traffic light system are informed by the latest risk assessment from the Joint Biosecurity Centre and wider public health factors. A decision on what happens next with test and travel will be announced later today. The industry is hoping for something that will fill up the sunbeds. Caroline Davis, BBC News.
The Welsh Government will decide today whether to introduce vaccine passports for entry into venues like nightclubs. The First Minister, Mark Drakeford, has previously said he believes there are ethical and practical problems with the idea, but concern remains over the high level of COVID infection.
Two men have been charged with the murder of the journalist Lyra McKee, who was shot during rioting in Londonderry in 2019. The men, aged 21 and 33, were arrested on Wednesday morning and have had a number of other charges brought against them, including firearms possession, rioting and arson.
Violence against women and girls should be considered as much of a priority as counter-terrorism. That's according to a major review of policing commissioned by the government. Reports of domestic abuse spiked during lockdown And a police watchdog found staggering variation in how forces dealt with the issue across England and Wales. Chief constables say more money is needed to bring offenders to justice more quickly. The government said tackling violence against women and girls is a top priority. Now, the Prime Minister's new cabinet will meet for the first time later this morning after the final changes were made to his ministerial team.
Let's talk to our political correspondent, Nick Eardley, who joins us from Westminster. Nick, morning to you. It's almost like the first day at school for some of these new ministers, isn't it? And I just wonder kind of how they're going to be judging the room, kind of establishing their authority in their briefs.
It's like the first day at school, but with some pretty big exams coming, Naga, because there are some pretty big challenges for ministers who find themselves in new portfolios or find themselves in Boris Johnson's top team around the big table for the first time this morning. And one of the things that a lot of people at Westminster are speculating about is that we've had almost two stages of Boris Johnson as Prime Minister so far. We had the Brexit bit, the big promise to get us out of the European Union. Then we had the pandemic, which basically meant a lot of the big stuff that the Prime Minister said he wanted to do was parked. This cabinet is about delivery, and it has some pretty big challenges to deliver potentially in a couple of years before we fire the starting gun on another general election campaign. So if you take, for example, levelling up, that phrase we've heard so many times from the Conservatives over the last 2 or 3 years, it's still pretty ill-defined, and there are still a lot of Tory MPs going, we don't know what it is and we don't know how the Prime Minister is going to deliver it. So Michael Gove, the Cabinet Minister who has responsibility for that, has a pretty big challenge to explain that a bit. The new Education Secretary, Nadeem Zahawi, has a huge entry of challenges after the impact of the pandemic on young people in schools, how to try and get their education back on track, whether that involves more money and more time for kids in school, some big asks for him, and that's just scratching the surface. Liz Truss, the new Foreign Secretary, has big questions over how to define this idea of global Britain, the kind of post-Brexit place in the world for the UK. So, you know, you'll see a lot of smiling faces this morning in Downing Street as these ministers turn up for their first cabinet meeting, but I suspect there's a bit of apprehension behind those smiles about how exactly they're going to deliver in what is a pretty tight timescale.
Well, we'll be keeping a close eye on it. Nick, thanks so much, Nick Eardley there.
Time now is 6:08. Sir Clive Sinclair, the British inventor who created one of the first pocket calculators, brought affordable home computers to the masses, has died at the age of 81.
Largely self-taught, he began inventing gadgets while he was still at school, still widely known for his creation of the rather ill-fated Sinclair C5 electric tricycle. Our technology correspondent Rory Kathleen-Jones has more.
His drive and enthusiasm made him one of Britain's best-known inventors.
The whole business of invention is a non-material thing. It's very hard to know why it gives such pleasure.
Clive Sinclair's fascination with gadgets started at school, and by his late teens he was selling his own electronic kits by mail order and writing technical manuals.
He then put a magnifying bubble over each digit to make it visible.
An obsession with miniaturization saw him launch the world's first slimline pocket calculator in 1972. Soon, though, competition from cheaper Japanese versions forced Sinclair to slash his prices. Then the failure of his next innovation, a digital watch, brought his company to its knees. Undaunted, he set up Sinclair Research and in 1980 launched a groundbreaking personal computer, the ZX80. It sold for under £100. It was the ZX Spectrum with its colour display which was his biggest success, credited by some with launching the UK's computer and video games industries. More money had been poured into his obsession with a new form of urban transport. The Sinclair C5, launched in the freezing winter of 1985, became something of a national joke. And many critics complained it was unsafe on busy urban roads.
You try some things and they succeed, and sometimes they don't. And I don't look back on it and say to myself, the C5 was a marvellous idea which failed because people jumped on it. I don't think that's true. I think it was not good enough to succeed, as simple as that.
Having run out of money, Sinclair was forced to sell his computer business to a budding entrepreneur called Alan Sugar. Undeterred, he continued his quest for a new kind of personal transport. But an electric bicycle, the Zyke, proved no more popular than the C5. It's as a brilliant inventor who gave millions their first introduction to computers that he will be remembered.
It's a really fascinating look back, isn't it?
Yeah,
At
and
the things that he was involved in.
You forget kind of the things he was involved in, because you just think of the C5. And I was just saying that, you know, you look at the computers, you know, the ZX80, and all the younger people are like, oh, is that how it all started? Because it's just so different.
And
it felt
all
so
of these things are
revolutionary.
so normalised that the idea of it being a kind of news story around a little calculator or something seems extraordinary.
Amazing. It was a different time.
See the headlines as they happen and watch BBC News live in the app and get the full story with bbc.co.uk/news. Follow the story for all the latest with BBC News.